Before we start the show, I must ask you, nay, implore you, to vote for us in Madison Magazine's Best of Madison 2024 contest. Y'all, the CityCast Madison podcast and our newsletter Madison Minutes are up again for Best Local Podcast and Best Local News Website. Your nominations are what got us this far. Let's make it official and vote. You have until June 30th. Please don't put this off. Go to our show notes for a link now, and let's make podcast history together.
Today on CityCast Madison. Midwesterners have often said that if you don't like the weather, just wait a couple minutes. That old saying seems to resonate even more today with extreme weather events, including tornadoes, becoming more common in southern Wisconsin. In fact, we have seen the warmest winter in Madison since record-keeping began in 1895. So what climate challenges are we facing, and can we do anything to change the path we're on? Host Bianca Martin sat down with Steve Vavaris, the director of the Wisconsin State Climatology Office, for a revealing climate conversation about where we are and what we can do about it. It's Wednesday, June 26th. I'm Phil Circus, and here's what Madison's talking about.
Steve, hello.
Hi.
So, we spoke last July, not too long after you took on the official role as our state's first ever climatologist and director of the Wisconsin State Climatology Office. And we talked about things. You had goals for research and gathering more data across the state. So what's changed since we last talked, besides the climate?
Yeah, so the office continues to grow, and we continue to react to weather extremes, as we've seen. So last time we talked, we were in the thick of the drought and the smoke, and that continued through the summer. And then we suddenly improved this spring, and now it's a complete flip, and we're all talking about how wet it's been and how flooded the streets have been and our yards and so forth.
Isn't that something? Like it did the flip-flop, which is exactly what you said is going to happen with more energy in the system.
Yeah, we flipped and flopped. We went from really wet early last year to a dry, and now we've gone from dry to really wet. So who knows what's next in the next 6 months?
Yeah. And, I just remember last year sitting at a park and just sitting on yellow grass in the middle of the summer. Something felt very strange. But now I just saw a headline this week that Wisconsin now nearly drought free. And judging from the past couple of weeks of rainstorms, that's such a different picture. Are we in the clear for any drought scenarios this year?
For the time being, at least. So virtually all of Wisconsin is now officially drought-free. And that's very different even from where we were a couple months ago. In the middle of March, it was looking like we were drying out again. But fortunately, Mother Nature has delivered in a big way, in some cases too big a way, with spring rainfall.
Yeah, feeling loved over here. And I remember you noting that in June, July, and August, those are our heaviest times for rainfall as a state, generally speaking. Is it too quick to say we're back to normal?
It is. So you're right. June, July, and August are our wettest 3 months, typically in Wisconsin. And those are also the months we tend to get the heaviest rainfalls individually, like really big downpours like we've been seeing lately. So in a sense, we're kind of on schedule. But as we saw last year, things can flip on a dime. We were so wet the first 4 months of last year, and then suddenly May and June extremely dry. There's no indications in the next week or two that we're going to flip into a super dry mode, but these droughts can come on in a hurry. And when they do, they're called flash droughts, like the kind we observed last year.
I want to talk about last winter, because I saw your report that called it a lost winter. It was so warm. Why did we have such a warm winter this past year?
Yeah, it was record warm in Wisconsin, and it wasn't just a record warm winter. It was record warm by a lot. It was 2 full degrees statewide, which doesn't sound like much when you think about day-to-day temperature variability, but for a whole season, that is a big way to break a record. And there were probably 3 major reasons for it. One was we had a major El Nino event in the Pacific Ocean, and that typically provides warmer than normal winters in the upper Midwest, and we certainly saw that this year. Another reason was that we had so little snow cover. Southern Wisconsin actually often most of the winter had more than the north, which is really strange. And so for northern Wisconsin in particular to have so little snow cover, that also added to the warmth because you lose that chilling effect of the snowpack. And then the third reason was long-term climate change. Winters are warming just like every season, and winters have been warming the most in the state. So when you put those three factors together, they all conspired to produce a record warm winter in the state.
People like it sometimes when it's not super cold. You're like, oh, well, this is clearly climate change, but I don't mind not freezing my buns off. But in the summary that you guys did about the impacts, you did a winter climate summary. You said that this warm weather over the winter could really impact our tourism and our agriculture. Can you talk about what ways and what are the impacts of seeing something like that?
Right. So there's trade-offs when it comes to these weather extremes. So it is true that it's understandable. Nobody likes it when it's 30 below zero and you're freezing. We didn't see much of that this year. But the trade-off is for this warmth is that our society, our infrastructure, our events are all planned around a certain predictable type of envelope of climate. So we can have, some variations from the average, but we don't want to get so far away from the average that it becomes unrecognizable. And that's pretty much the way it was. We had a winter that was similar to that of a typical winter in Southern Illinois this year, and that's really odd. And so things like the ski industry, snowmobiling, people who rely on ice fishing, those were all severely affected. And a lot of those are small family operations, and they just don't have deep pockets to withstand a major hit like they suffered. We also saw community events, ice sculpting festivals and snow festivals, winter festivals of all sorts that either had to be canceled or curtailed, like the Birkebeiner. They had to be very resourceful in cutting down their normal snow tracks into something manageable. So it affects us in different ways, and there are trade-offs. We shouldn't feel guilty when we'd rather have 30 degrees for comfort than minus 30, but we do need to recognize that that comes with a price.
Yeah, I remember talking to one of the owner at Tackle and Bait Shop here, and it was like the ice is frozen over, the lakes are frozen, but for how long? And that was, short-lived, unfortunately, for the ice fishermen, like you said. And in terms of agriculture, how did that impact that picture?
Yeah, with agriculture, it's complicated. It affected in different ways. One negative way was that we were so warm and so snow-free that there was actually a fair amount of evaporation from the soils, which contributed to the already dry soils at that time in February and March. And so in a sense, it extended or exacerbated the drought conditions from last year. And that's one of the reasons we were so concerned in the middle of March that we were already drying out. We didn't have that replenished snowpack that we normally get into the soils for moisture. And so we were beginning the year on dry footing again. Another concern when we have a winters this warm is that you can have something called a false spring, which means that the plants break out of their dormancy too early, maybe even as early as January, sometimes February, when it's just too early to be starting to bud and leaf out. And the problem with that is that if we then get a hard freeze in the spring, something that's not out of the ordinary, the plants are not in a good position to handle it. And it can lead to some really big problems for the fruit industry, the wine industry. So it can have some real detrimental agricultural impacts. On the other hand, if you don't get a late freeze, it can extend the growing season, which can have some benefits. So just like with human comfort, these weather variations can have trade-offs for agriculture as well.
I think a big one on people's mind, that unprecedented February tornado this year, and this summer has already brought more. What's the picture like right now on the tornado front?
Yeah, you're right. It's been a very active spring for tornadoes, not just in Wisconsin, but around the country. I think it's the most since about 2010, 2011. So this is really, really high for tornadic activity and severe storms of other types, as we've certainly seen in much of southern Wisconsin in particular this month. One of the things with tornadoes is that there's a lot of just random variability in terms of who gets hit and whether a particular year is going to be high or low. But the February tornadoes were noteworthy in terms of climate change because normally on the 8th of February, it is just too cold in Wisconsin to have tornadoes. And that's why we had never recorded any in the month of February. But it was warm enough, just warm enough in southern Wisconsin, at least on that day in February, to fuel the tornadoes. And it was bizarre, right? I mean, you hear the sirens, you see the tornadoes, and you think it's February 8th. This can't be happening. So that I think is something we could link to a warming climate more so than a particularly active spring season that we've seen, because there's nothing unusual about tornadoes in May. Just this year, just the amount of them.
Right. Just from your year in the office at the head, do you feel any differently about the outlook of how intense climate change is going to impact our state?
Well, it's been a really unusual beyond 12 months now. I started in January, and not just in Wisconsin. I mean, it's been very eventful here between the smoke and the dryness and the wetness, all sorts of things going on in the warmth. But May marked the 12th consecutive month globally when our planet's temperature was a record high for that month. So record high May, record high April, record high March, all the way back a full year's worth, 12 consecutive months. I'm almost certain that's never happened before. And so the effects, the evidence for a warming planet has never been clearer. And we're seeing it in Wisconsin. I think it was the fourth warmest year on record in 2023. We're off to a warm start again in 2024. So it's alarming, it's disconcerting, it's disorienting, and the evidence just piles up by seemingly by the week of more examples of how the climate is different than it used to be.
So you're listening to CityCast Madison. You clearly care about what's happening in our city and have fantastic taste in podcasts. I've got a recommendation for another local news podcast you gotta check out. It's called 365 Amplified. Every week, the award-winning reporting team behind Madison 365 digs into their most important stories from the week, and they focus on the greater Madison communities of color, with stories and perspectives you likely won't hear from many other mainstream outlets. They have on community leaders, lawmakers, artists, and many more for candid conversations. They drop new episodes every Friday at madison365.org/amplified. And you can also search 365 Amplified wherever you're listening to this show right now.
Hi, I'm David Plotz, CEO of CityCast. Or, as I can say now, thanks to a few weeks with Babbel, hola, soy David Plotz, el jefe de CityCast. What if in 2024 you got a little bit better every day? When you're learning a new language with Babbel, that's exactly what you're doing. And if Babbel can help me start speaking a new language in just 3 weeks, imagine what you could do in a full year. I got started with Babbel because I realized that my girlfriend, who's a native Spanish speaker, and my son, who's in AP Spanish, were conspiring against me, or I thought they were conspiring against me in Spanish. I wanted to know what they were talking about. And now, thanks to literally just a few weeks of Babbel, I'm starting to be able to eavesdrop. It is rare that something so fun and simple, and Babbel is super fun and very simple, is also so useful. So here's a special limited time deal for CityCast listeners. Right now, get up to 60% off your Babbel subscription, but only for CityCast listeners at babbel.com/CityCast. Get up to 60% off at babbel.com/CityCast. Spelled BABBEL.com/CityCast. Rules and restrictions may apply.
Well, I appreciate you, bringing the global context. Like we are a part of the full, it's a global system here. And I just saw a crazy story about, it says a rare whale. It's a whale that was assumed extinct in the Atlantic Ocean. Apparently it swam all the way from the Pacific Ocean to the Atlantic. And, lots of researchers we're like, we can't believe our eyes. This can't be happening. We have not seen this whale here in such a long time. And that was disturbing because I'm thinking about the ice caps and the warming and that bigger picture. And, you see sort of the storms and severe events that people have to weather across the world. And we have been described in Wisconsin as a climate haven. People thinking on the coast that we're not going to be hit by natural disasters like hurricanes or wildfires. But we have, we just had this kind of strange behavior with tornadoes in February. Do you think that our calculus for tornadoes as a more frequent event and maybe sooner and more of them, like, is that something that could happen here?
Tornadoes are one type of weather phenomenon that climatologists don't have a good handle on how they'll change in the future. There's different factors, different ingredients that create tornadoes. And in the future, we expect some of those ingredients to favor more or stronger tornadoes and others that favor fewer or weaker tornadoes. And so putting that all together, it's a tug of war. It's not clear which side's going to win. But there are other things related to tornadoes, like heavy rainstorms, that we're much more confident about because those heavy rainstorms rely on having more water vapor in the atmosphere. Warmer air can hold more water vapor. And so we just start off with more humidity for a storm to tap. And so if conditions are right to produce a heavy rain anyway, now it has a lot more fuel to work with. And so we have an unambiguous signal toward more heavy rainstorms around the country, around the world. Some of these extreme flooding events we've seen in the last few years are kind of mind-blowing. Places getting up to a year's worth of rainfall in a single storm. That just shouldn't happen. And yet we're seeing examples of these extreme rainfalls occurring more and more in different parts of the world.
Yeah. And can you talk a little bit more about what we've seen so far this year in Wisconsin when it comes to rainfall?
Yeah, so the numbers aren't officially out for spring, but it appears that the spring season, March, April, May, will probably go down around the fifth wettest on record around the state. Some parts of the state, especially the southern half, have received quite a bit more. And just at the very tail end of May, the last 2 weeks were extremely wet in southern Wisconsin and some parts of elsewhere in the state. So it really went out with a bang and helped to create probably one of the 10 wettest Mays on record. But April, May, March were all wetter than normal, and you combine them together and you get one of the wettest Mays or wettest springs on record. And we've been seeing more wet springs. We've been seeing overall a wetter trend in every season. And interestingly, I found that in both winter and summer, the three wettest of those seasons have all occurred in the last 20 years. So just very recently, we've had some extremely wet seasons, not just spring this year, but also winters, also summers. And so it's not our imagination when we think, wow, there's been a lot of flooded streets and a lot of flooded fields and so on lately. It really has been happening more and more.
Yeah, and our city really had to do a big cleanup after the big storm. I mean, it was a tornado that kind of the storm spun off of, but there were trees down all across the city, and even the schools closed. So it is interesting to kind of think about that and the extreme storms, extreme thunderstorms, and how that might impact people's sense of us as a climate haven. I think I saw that you guys were doing a conference last year on that topic, like us as a climate haven. Do I have that right?
Right. Yeah. So our research center at UW-Madison, the Nelson Institute Center for Climatic Research, hosted a campus-wide and community-wide event on that very topic. Will Wisconsin become a climate haven? And it was meant to be somewhat of a provocative title to bring interest because we can't answer that question truly. But we did try to present a balanced picture. Some of the reasons why people think that Wisconsin and the Great Lakes could become a refuge, and other reasons why we should be very careful and realistic about that possibility. Because for every reason you could come up with why we might be a climate haven, you can come up with counter arguments why we might not. And the floods we've seen this spring, the tornadoes we saw in February, the drought, wildfire smoke we saw last year would all be reasons to be cautious about that expectation.
Yeah, and we saw some smoke a little bit, and maybe last month I think that there were some warnings, but it seemed to have dissipated.
Yeah, it was just kind of a quick one. A day or two, we did have some smoke alerts, advisories around the state, but after last summer, it was nothing in that league, and hopefully we won't see a repeat this year.
Well, I know I like good news, and so does everyone else. Can we talk about some of the resources or what makes us a possible climate haven? Some of the good things we have going for us.
Right. Let's talk about what's good about Wisconsin, right?
Yeah. I'm stirring up all the storms, being negative. No.
That's right. Well, there's a lot of good things about Wisconsin, as we know. Our weather is fickle. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's challenging. But some of the things that we have going for us, probably the biggest single thing we have going for us is water. So even during the drought last year, we still had plenty of water. I mean, the lakes weren't drying up. We still had the Great Lakes next to us. We had the Mississippi River. That's not going anywhere. We have something like 15,000 inland lakes. And so those weren't on the verge of drying out either. So that's something that's comforting, and we'll have that in the future. Not everyone will have enough water, as we know, in the future. Not everyone does today. And so that's a big thing going for us. Another thing we have going for us is that we are, relative to other states, we're a northerly climate. And so even if the climate warms as a whole in the country, Wisconsin will still be cooler than other parts of the US. And then there's all the things that we don't have. We don't have hurricanes, we have limited wildfires, and we don't have sea level rise to contend with. And so all of these things that go into the mix could make, in many ways does make Wisconsin an attractive climate as the climate warms.
Some good news. I mean, you are good news in and of yourself. The fact that you started at the beginning of 2023 as our state climatologist. You also told us last year that you would be building out your office, and you had some plans around the Mesonet that was being set up to capture data across the state.
Yep. So it goes by the name WiscoNet now, but it's a Mesonet, meaning it's a statewide network of eventually fairly closely packed weather stations. The goal is to have one per county in Wisconsin, so all 72 counties plus some extras. Right now, there's a lot of extras in Door County to help the fruit growers there. So the Mesonet or WiscoNet is not technically part of the state climatology office, but it's a close partner. They're all state climatology office and WiscoNet are all part of this Rural Partnerships Institute at UW-Madison, which provided the money through a federal grant through the USDA for 4 years to get both programs up and running. So they work with me. I'm on their board. We interact frequently, and obviously this is great weather information for the whole state. It's updated every 5 minutes. It's not just weather conditions, it's also soil conditions. So soil moisture, boy, what a change we've seen from last year to this year. And it's all quantified, all high quality weather instrumentation. And so you can go onto their website. I think they're up to 25 stations and growing. It seems like every week they add another station. It's hard to keep up with. But I think the plan is to get up to about 45, 50 stations by the end of this year, and then another round of implementation for next year. So they are really active. They're hiring. They just hired a data visualization specialist to make this data more accessible to the public. So please, for everybody, go to that WiscoNet site and see what's new, because there's a lot of nice new tools.
This makes my heart so happy.
Yes, mine too. It was much needed.
It was much. I feel like it was 6.
Yeah.
There were 6 stations doing the whole state. So
yes, and they weren't evenly distributed either. I mean, the nice thing is by having one per county, it guarantees good spatial coverage.
Mm-hmm. And last time we spoke, you did tell me that you still had hope about humans addressing climate change. How do you feel today?
Oh, I still have hope, but every month that passes, every year that passes, the window gets tighter, right? To try to figure this out. But there's really good news in terms of like clean energy. We really are expanding our usage, our implementation of clean energy. But it's kind of a race between getting more carbon neutral technologies and activities out there and energy efficiency measures with the fact that the climate, it continues to change. Carbon dioxide continues to build in the atmosphere. So we need to win this battle, this race. And right now we aren't, but we're making strides in many ways that make me optimistic. And ultimately, I always say, humans created this problem. We can solve it. This isn't like a giant asteroid hitting us for like the dinosaurs' demise. We know what we've done, and we know what steps we can take to try to address it. And there's certain things that are win-win strategies, like reducing food waste, which benefit everybody. Nobody wants to waste food. And we've learned recently that that's one of the biggest levers we have in addressing climate change, because food production is such a big carbon emitter.
Well, I think that we know where we need to go next for another conversation. Go find who's helping out that issue here in Madison. So thank you for finding the specific bit for folks to look further into and giving us some hope. Steve, thank you so much for updating us. I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Bianca. Thanks for having me.
That was Steve Vavris, climatologist and director of the Wisconsin State Climatology Office. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm Phil Circus. If you enjoyed the show, why not share this episode with someone who is feeling under the weather? We'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city.